Social media posts that highlight the benefit of hanging is pretty common these days, and they typically focus on its ability to improve your grip strength and spinal decompression. However, the true value in hanging when used effectively lies in its ability to improve your shoulder flexibility, which is the primary reason that I use it with my clients in my own training. So today I'm going to walk you through the steps to achieve this, which requires us to also think beyond hanging. To gain these benefits of improving shoulder flexibility from hanging, we want to start also gaining an understanding of our scapular function, specifically how it's going to be used in a hang, as well as how to position the body to get the most out of the stretch. I view hanging as a form of weighted stretching through the shoulders, the lats, the entire upper body. Our body weight is being suspended, and in doing so, it's putting stress on these tissues in a lengthened position and creating a weighted stretch. When we think about this orientation of the scapula and the line of the body that it's positioned in, we can get more out of this. We can gain better carryover to other movements and other functions that require this range of motion. So learning things like overhead shrugging motions. Our scapula moves in elevation and depression, so it moves upward when we elevate, and when we depress the scapula, it moves downward. Drills that teach us this will be quite helpful. I like the overhead shrug, which can be done in a kneeling posture, or if very limited overhead, we can also use a adjustable bench to find ourselves in a position that allows us to facilitate the best range of motion. And also bodyline drills like a hollow body hold, which can be done on the ground, will teach us the alignment of the bones in such a way that will allow us to gain the best stretch sensation when using a hang. So step one, just learning these basic movements and understanding how your shoulders are going to function in hang will be super important if you're trying to get the most out of it. Of course, also if our shoulders are quite deconditioned and quite weak, jumping right into suspended hanging positions is not going to be the best starting point. So there's other ways that we can start understanding how to stretch the lats, and we also want to consider the stretch in a position that creates a fixed arm like we would in a hang. So lean away stretches, which are pretty common, they've been around for a while, are nice entry points to understand that stretch of the lats and how we can get the most out of it. The one that I'm going to share with you today that I think is really good for this is the alternate grip lat lean away. And with that alternate grip, what we're actually able to do is have one hand in supination, so underhand grip on the bar, which is also going to allow for the lats to find their best length. And with the other hand over top, we're going to be able to isolate that one side, and we're going to be able to explore some rotational movements here to experience that lat sensation and create some strength in our stretch position before jumping right up into the bar. Jumping up to the bar can be done in an assisted manner, and assisted could be in how we take load off of the shoulders. So with our feet supported on the ground, that is a good means of taking load off the shoulders and creating more of a progressive approach to hanging in the positions that I'm talking about here. And the first hanging posture that we're really going to focus on is what is often called as the passive hang, but it's not really passive. If we are using these scapular positions discussed earlier, like elevation and depression, the passive hang is essentially the most elevated position we can find in the shoulder, or at least trying to do so. So there is an active component that way in the shoulders, in that we're trying to actively elevate to find the best stretch in that position. Also, if we're keeping a good body line to accentuate the stretch, it's also not going to be in what feels like a passive position. But this language of passive versus active does help us categorize things. So an elevated scapular position where the shoulders will become more relaxed over time is what we would call a passive hang. And this is going to be a good entry point for anyone that's starting to accumulate time in the hang. This is also a good way for us to take some measurements of improvement. When we see someone doing a passive hang, they may not be able to fully elevate their scapula, But over time, with putting some effort into a lot of these qualities that we're discussing, the scapula is able to find full elevation, and that's what we call a shape change and an improvement in range of motion. So our first step in getting into a hang, this is the approach we want to take, exploring passive hangs, which can also be assisted to manage load. And we also want to ensure that we're carrying over some of those entry level drills that we learned prior to get the most out of the hanging position, and we're understanding that. From here, we're going to move to an active hanging position. So an active hanging position now takes the scapula and it puts it more in a depressed orientation. So they're moving the shoulders away from the body. And this is going to be even more important for us to categorize as active, because what it does is it controls our movement. When we're in this active position, it's going to be a lot easier for us to create a fixed position of the body to hang in. And we're basically going to be able to control the positioning of the body and the movement of the torso a lot more, but also just gain an understanding of how much range of motion we have available in the scapula. And how do we get the scapula to move separately from the arms? So things to pay attention to here when we're moving into an active hang is if it's actually happening from the scapula and not just the arms, because oftentimes when you start to get people to move into these postures, the arms will start to bend, and this is going to be a form of developing those shape qualities as well too, is to understand that we want it to come from the scapula in the back and not just the arms themselves. So moving from passive hangs, we're going to start creating some of these movements. So what's helpful when we start to gain experience and strength in those initial entry points is things like hanging shrugs. So taking what we learned in those entry level exercises that we were doing for the scapula, we carry it over to the pull-up bar now. So from hanging, we start to actually depress the scapula by squeezing the shoulders down and then elevate, and we move in and out of that range of motion to gain a better understanding of those qualities. Also, just being able to hold the body in that active position for a duration of 30 seconds or so is going to be quite beneficial as we move into the next component of the hang that is important. And for me, it's the one arm active hang. The one arm hang can be passive and it can be active, but I like starting with the active one arm hang in that it's going to allow us to think a lot more about total body control. And when we go into that fully elevated passive kind of range of motion with one arm, it creates a lot more scenario for us to be moving and swaying in the shoulders, basically having a more laxity to do things that we might not be ready for. But what the one arm hang progressions do for us is they get us increasing our strength in the hang, but also learning how to what's called brachiate. And this brachiation movement, which is basically the ability to swing from the limbs, the arms, it is a very primitive type movement. We're born to do so. We're created in a way where that is something we can do. And these one arm hang progressions start to teach us what it's like to have that swaying type motion in a hanging position. So progressions that I like here is moving from an active hanging posture. We're going to think about shifting weight over to make the other hand lighter. So that other hand can start getting lighter. We can move to 4 fingers. We can move to 3 fingers, 1 finger supported. We can also do feet supported one arm hangs as well to gain a better understanding of the strength required and the demands of that hanging posture. Once we start getting ourselves in a one arm active hang for a duration of 10 to 15 seconds, we can then start thinking about how the scapula can move in one arm. And this is a very natural thing that our shoulders are designed to do. So once we have gained this freedom of movement in our swing and we've developed strength now in the one arm hang, because now that's what we've moved towards, is we've moved towards reshaping the scapular range of motion in a hanging posture. So we've reached a full elevation. We've reached the ability to move and depress the scapula in a full depressed position. To now, we've actually focused a lot more on the strength qualities of a hang, moving to one arm, swaying and using that brachiation type movement. We then want to consider the other side of the hang. And our shoulders they have the capacity to move through a full 360 range of motion. And that is often overlooked in that, we don't want to move our shoulders this way or that way because it's not required, but they actually have the capacity to fully rotate in a 360 manner. And the other side of the hang is what starts to expose these stretch positions and starts to expose these freedoms of movement. And what we would consider that, and what most disciplines like gymnastics would call it, is things like a German hang, skin the cat, or also what's called a full inlocate, where the shoulders move through a full rotation and back. Now, there are safer entry points than just rotating around a pull-up bar if you haven't been exposed to it, and it's actually quite similar to how we're exposing the initial starting points of the hang. So even in those initial starting points of your journey to develop like a hang, if you're getting into strong active hanging and you're starting to move towards one arm hang progressions, there's no reason why you can't start introducing yourself to some of these other side of the bar hanging progressions as well. And the first one we're going to look at is the eagle hang. So the eagle hang takes the shoulders and puts them in a more internally rotated position. This stretch is much greater on the pecs and forearms, and this would be the finished position of what's called an inlocate. So it's kind of like the other side of the hang as a passive hang. So the shoulders are fully elevated. Understanding that fully elevated position is also the position that we're going to feel like we can move the shoulders from in that full rotation. And accumulating time in this eagle hang, both bilaterally and unilaterally. So unilaterally is often a safer entry point for people because you can grab the bar, rotate around, and use your feet supported position to find a safe stretch through the biceps, pecs, and elbows. We can also think about these coordination drills with exercises like a barbell rollout. This barbell rollout, we can set the barbell up in such a way that it creates a dynamic movement similar to what it would do if we were doing a skin the cat on the bar. So we start to introduce ourselves to the qualities of shoulder extension when we're moving in a hang, and what happens at the shoulder, what kind of strength we have there. That itself can be progressed to a barbell inlocate, so actually rolling all the way back to a point where the shoulders can fully inlocate. But you can now already start to imagine the types of progressions that are available to us in a hang and in completely restoring the capacity of our upper body. What I also really love about the hang is that it's just such a simple entry point for a lot of people who have been really confused and watered down with so many drills for mobility that they've kind of lost their reason for doing it in the first place. So this may have been something you've experienced. I've experienced it myself in the past, where you're doing some mobility exercises and you're trying to work your shoulders and you just really get lost in like, what am I actually trying to improve or work upon? And the hang really takes away a lot of that. It's not as time constraint specific, like it doesn't eat up a lot of time. It can be built quite easily into traditional training models, and we can actually have some progression. So again, that progression, we're not just hanging, right? We have a certain intent that's going on in the body in that hang. There's a body line position. There's certain scapular orientations that we want to understand and get good at. We want to develop that passively and accumulate time. We're looking at something like being able to do a passive hold for 60 seconds is quite beneficial. And it's not just passive, right? It's fully elevated in a posture that allows you to keep a body line that accentuates the stretch of the lats. We want to understand how to move actively so that actively we can move from one hand to the next and start introducing this freedom of movement, this primitive type swaying motion that we were actually built to do. And then we want to understand the other side of the hang, because the other side of the hang now starts to address the other side of shoulder flexibility, shoulder extension, pec flexibility, the ability to move the arms behind the body and what that range of motion should look like. And with hanging, we're not just improving passive tissue qualities, we're getting strong as hell. Right? So the main kind of takeaway here is that yes, hanging is great, and we want to hang for the benefits of what it can do for the body, decompress the spine and grip strength. But if you're really looking to use the hang to change your shoulder flexibility, there's a lot of considerations that you want to think about to get the most from it. These type of programming concepts are available in my basic flexibility programming on the Range of Strength membership. So you get access to the training app, you get two-way messaging for coaching support and form review, access to the community, and through all of my programming model types, there's always some form of hanging. But I would get started today, and I would make sure that you are considering these thoughts when integrating hanging into your training. And if you have any questions, comment, like, and share. And if there's something else you'd like to see, let me know. But just a little bit of framework around what it really means to hang, in my opinion. Thanks for watching.